final public hearing midday Thursday.
We've received a huge amount of documents from the Secret Service and have learned some additional things.
We will look ahead to tomorrow's January 6th committee hearing shortly. Welcome to Red and Blue. I'm Major Garrett, coming to you from our Washington bureau. Thanks so much for joining us. Tonight, Pennsylvania's Democratic Senate nominee John Fetterman is still responding to concerns about his health, doing so less than a month before the midterm elections. Fetterman, of course, is the state's lieutenant governor. He gave his first in-person, on-camera interview to NBC after suffering a stroke some 5 months ago. Now, during that interview, Fetterman used a closed captioning device so he can read and respond to a reporter's spoken questions in real time. Republican nominee Dr. Mehmet Oz has called on Fetterman to disclose more about his health. Fetterman has asserted his team, quote, have been very transparent in a lot of different ways, unquote.
Our doctor has already given a letter saying that I'm able to serve and to be running.
I mean, respectfully, that letter from your physician, that was 6 months ago. Don't voters deserve to know your status now?
Being in front of thousands and thousands of people and having interviews and getting around all across Pennsylvania, that gives everybody and the voters decide, if they think that it's really the issue.
Now, Fetterman's campaign released a statement after that interview saying the Senate candidate is healthy, but he, quote, still has a lingering auditory processing issue, unquote. The campaign says Fetterman's doctors tell him he can expect that condition eventually to go away. Joining us now are two of my CBS News colleagues, Robert Costa and Caitlin Huey-Burns. Robert, of course, is our chief election and campaign correspondent. I'm happy to say he's joining us from Philadelphia. Caitlin is political correspondent and with me right here at the desk. Robert, let me start with you. Is what Pennsylvania voters saw in that interview, to the best of your ability to discern, having any impact, pro or con, for Fetterman?
I've spoken with sources in the last hour close to John Fetterman's Senate campaign, and they are making an effort to continue to put him out there, to engage with voters and also to engage with reporters. Just this afternoon, Fetterman, the lieutenant governor, sat down with an editorial board, an influential one, here in Pennsylvania for about an hour, taking questions. Yes, he's using a closed captioning device, his campaign says, but they've disclosed that weeks ago. And they have also said he will use that in the upcoming lone Senate debate here in Pennsylvania. Walking through Philadelphia this afternoon, talking to voters, it's evident they're closely following the race, but not necessarily tracking John Fetterman's health. They're tracking issues like the economy, abortion rights, and other things that affect their kitchen table and their lives more than how they're interpreting the most recent Fetterman sit-down.
Today, Fetterman put on his Twitter account, recovering from a stroke in public isn't easy, but in January I'm going to be much better. Dr. Oz will still be a fraud. Bob, you're there. When Fetterman says, as he did in that interview, that he's going around doing all of these events, seeing thousands upon thousands of people, for those either in Pennsylvania or those watching this race from afar, is that actually true? Is he that active and engaging that frequently with crowds of that size?
He has been active. Of course, since he suffered a stroke in May, his campaign has been different. John Fetterman, when he was rising through Pennsylvania politics as a mayor of Braddock, a small city, to becoming lieutenant governor, he was someone who was seen as progressive and also populist in the sense of him building connections and bonds, having a rapport with working people throughout Pennsylvania. His campaign had envisioned a very active, bustling campaign. As he's recovered from a stroke, his schedule has been pulled back in part, but he's slowly begun in recent weeks to rebuild the Fetterman-type campaign us political reporters long expected to see in the close of the Pennsylvania Senate race. On Sunday, for example, he had a major rally in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, my home area where I grew up, in the suburbs, the collar counties of Philadelphia, and he drew over 1,000 people to Bristol, Pennsylvania. And he's expecting to have more of those rallies in the future, as is Dr. Mehmet Oz, the Republican nominee. So you see Fetterman now moving towards this debate, increasingly on the trail, having rallies, maybe not at the pace he would have if he hadn't have suffered a stroke in May. So the campaign's different, but he is engaged.
So For the audience's benefit, Robert has given me permission to use Robert and Bob interchangeably, so I'm going to say Bob right now. Bob, as you well know, Senate campaigns have an ebb and flow to them. Fetterman was leading. This health scare definitely stalled that momentum. Mehmet Oz has poured a ton of money into ads critical of Fetterman. The race appears closer now. Do you have a sense of where that momentum is, or is it sort of frozen in advance of this October 25th debate, which will clearly be pivotal?
What's important to remember about the Pennsylvania Senate race is that it's not happening in a vacuum. You have a gubernatorial race in Pennsylvania that's also dominating state politics. Doug Mastriano, backed by former President Trump, he was in Washington on the day of the Capitol attack, an outsider's outsider, someone who was questioned the election of 2020, repeated the false claims of former President Trump. Mastriano's running, and he's bringing up issues not only red and blue, but issues of democracy to Pennsylvania. And Democratic gubernatorial nominee Josh Shapiro is out front in that gubernatorial race in almost every poll in recent months, showing Shapiro way ahead of Mastriano. And because of Shapiro's campaign, the Democrats feel pretty good about their chances in Pennsylvania in a tough year. Any midterm year is tough for the party in power. And they know that the Senate race is closer than the gubernatorial race, but they're talking about voters who might go both for Shapiro and for Fetterman.
Robert, hold on. I'm going to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns. Caitlin, you're just back from Wisconsin. That's another place that has a very close Senate race, also a very close governor's race. What are the trends that you discerned there in Wisconsin?
Yeah, well, it definitely feels like crunch time there compared to other states that I've been. You could see yard signs in most of the homes across where we were traveling. But what was really interesting is that this is an issue that the issue of crime is really hitting very specifically in Wisconsin. We've seen Republicans use this as a national issue, but in Wisconsin, it seems to be resonating. Voters that we talked to that were supporting Johnson, voters that we talked to that were supporting Barnes, all of them pretty much said that crime is an issue that they are feeling personally, this issue of crime, public safety. And so this is a situation where the Democratic candidate is a little bit on defense. Watching the airwaves, as you know, when you travel to cover campaigns, you turn on the TV to see what voters there are seeing. Every other ad was essentially on the issue of crime. There has been millions of dollars spent on this, and voters are feeling it. On our polling, too, voters were saying that they trusted Johnson more than Barnes on this. We had the opportunity to talk to both candidates. Mandela Barnes told us that, look, he doesn't support defunding the police. He wants to fund the police, and he kind of pointed the finger back at Johnson, saying Johnson was downplaying a little bit the violence on January 6th. Johnson's case is that, Democrats' rhetoric has contributed to a dampening of morale in the police force. And we did talk to some law enforcement officers who echoed that sentiment, but they were supportive of him. So this is an issue that voters are feeling acutely. And the question is kind of how Barnes can make it up, whether he can use the issue of abortion access, which is also acutely felt in Wisconsin because they are currently under an 1849 law that's banning nearly all abortions in the state. Is that enough to give him momentum? That's also something that we're watching in that race.
Real quick, Caitlin, there's a new Marquette Law School poll out today that in this Senate race has Ron Johnson at 52%, Mandela Barnes, the Democratic nominee, 46%. Does it feel that wide to you?
It feels closer than that because this is Wisconsin. It is a very tight race. I also spoke to Governor Evers very quickly a couple of days ago while we were there. And I said, why are these races so close in our polling and in other polls? And he said, look, Wisconsin is a purple state. This is going to be very close. So when you see a poll that has that wide of a gap, the question is kind of what are some undecided voters feeling? And that was a question in that poll. But I will say that it certainly felt like Johnson had regained some of the momentum that he perhaps lost as abortion had come to the forefront over the summer. So in our poll, it shows a very close race. The Johnson campaign feels pretty good about what they are seeing. And you can tell, by the way, that Barnes is focusing on abortion, hoping that can be enough to really motivate his base of supporters and maybe reach out to those who might not be engaged in the process but are engaged on that issue.
And Wisconsin different from Pennsylvania, as Bob was telling us, the Pennsylvania governor's race a bit wider in margin than the Senate race in Pennsylvania, but in both races in Wisconsin, Senate and governor, all polling, with the exception maybe of this Marquette Law School polling, shows them both very close.
Very, very close.
Caitlin Huey-Burns, Robert Costa, we thank you so very much. A voting bloc, of course. A monolith, not at all. Why Republicans are feeling hopeful about a longtime Democratic voting coalition. You are streaming Red and Blue, reporting across the political divide.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming free speech.
It's evident that there's a wave of censorship across the nation.
Angry partisan debate in schools.
College campuses have not been a place of intellectual diversity for the longest time now.
Are loud voices silencing a generation.
I don't feel comfortable speaking out.
I started to realize I wasn't even discussing stuff in class. I was keeping all my thoughts to myself.
Are the kids all right? Free speech. Now streaming on the free CBS News app. An original documentary from CBS Reports. Tensions rising between a powerful country and a vital island.
The supply of this technology came grinding to a halt. The world would grind to a halt.
Absolutely.
As Taiwan faces threats and aggression.
Taiwan is on the front line, and we understand our responsibility as a democracy. We cannot fall.
CBS News examines whether they can defend themselves.
Putin, Ukraine, China, Taiwan, there are manifestations of the battle between autocracy and democracy. And that is a fight that we're all engaged in.
Defending Taiwan, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
What are the words you would use to describe the Queen?
Kind, caring, and a nice lady.
I'm here for you.
America needs drivers.
And we're here to help.
What are you learning from Girls on the Run?
Never give up and to always keep trying.
You can see fire and rescue is up. They're doing wellness checks when people are trapped inside their homes.
We're going to be okay. We're going to make it.
We are so excited, we just can't hide it. Drew Barrymore.
Hi, guys.
Mayor Savino.
Miss Lopez and Mr. Maluma are Reggie.
It's the Fonz.
His name is Henry.
I know. It's all right.
One question. How often do you consume cannabis?
CBS mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Is this a date or are we just friends?
Here we are, your favorite morning people.
CBS mornings, starting at 7.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Major Garrett. CBS News is taking an in-depth look at the increasing power of Latino voters. CBS Reportes, El Poder, is set to premiere tomorrow. That's San Diego coming through, folks, if you didn't know. Tomorrow at 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on the CBS News Streaming Network. It includes reporting on the rightward shift of some Hispanic voters in southern Texas.
Adrian Peña Garza hopes her territory may be turning from blue to purple as more conservative Latinos become energized by one man, Donald Trump.
The wall is being built as we speak.
So border security is very important to us, the economy, family, faith, and freedom. I mean, that's the messaging that's been working for us.
The border looms large here. That means border security is a big issue with voters. Government data shows that this fiscal year, the Border Patrol made more than 400,000 arrests in the Rio Grande Valley, a record for this sector.
The biggest misconception is that we are a cartel-run, open borders, crime-ridden community. That is absolutely not true.
Democrat Richard Gonzalez's party is now on defense because his party's key issues, abortion, gun control, and the environment, are not as important to some as the economy, crime, and immigration.
To help us assess the impact of the Latino vote on the upcoming midterms, Finn Gomez, Leslie Sanchez, and Chuck Rocha all join us now. Finn is CBS News' political director. Leslie is a CBS News political analyst and Republican strategist. And Chuck is the president of Solidarity Strategies, and he's also a Democratic strategist. Finn, let me start with you. So South Texas, Rio Grande Valley is a place Republicans are finding a rich vein of Latino support. Also, they found it in 2020 in Miami-Dade County, one of the counties that switched most in votes Trump from Hillary Clinton in 2016 to 2020. What's going on in those two places?
Well, what you're seeing is that that there's been an aggressive courting by both parties of this important demographic. Latinos have shifted. They've shifted in South Texas. You're seeing it in the Texas 34th, Maya Flores, the conservative Republican, the first Mexican-born congresswoman. But also, you're seeing it again in South Florida. The economy resonates. Actually, immigration is something that resonates in some of these border areas, and it's shifting. It's a political shift. You're seeing in the latest polls, and it's something that both parties are trying to address.
Leslie and Chuck, I want you to both address this because political reporters sort of describe this as one thing, Latino voters. It's obviously not one thing. I grew up in San Diego, California. Latinos there are different than ones in Texas. They're different than ones in Florida. Whether your roots are Puerto Rico, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, any part of this has a different perspective, a different narrative story about how you got to America, what you expect once you get there. Both of you walk the audience through some of those differences and why they matter.
I'll start.
Go ahead, Leslie. Yes, I should have said that. Go ahead.
No, that's good. What's exciting about the conversation, most of our heritage, if you think of Latino, came here for economic or political freedom. And that is a common theme that's all the way through. And what's interesting about the conversation now is where Latino identity falls. You are now having second, third, fourth generation, in particular states like Texas, predominantly Mexican-American heritage, who see themselves not as Mexican-American, not as hyphenated Americans, as Texans and just Americans living their American dream. And as these communities are assimilated and acculturating, they see and are taking part in the electoral process in bigger ways. The biggest frustration right now, and the shift that I've seen even in my own internal polling in Texas, is the dissatisfaction with the Democratic Party. Traditionally, Democrats have been able to court and win Latino voters, and they haven't courted aggressively, you could argue, over the decades. But many Latinos in Texas and in many states across the country, Florida being different, have fallen into that camp. But as they see dissatisfaction for a lot of different reasons, they are looking for alternatives, and they are finding Republican candidates, particularly in South Texas, Latinas, who are fitting that bill for them and alleviating that crisis. And that is the opportunity for Republicans. As that friction point and that pain point exists, they are moving, not necessarily calling themselves Republicans, but moving in terms of party support.
Chuck, is this shift real? Can it be reversed if Democrats do something different? And if so, what ought they to do?
There is a shift. The catalyst said after the last election that the Latino vote moved about 8% nationwide, but in places major that you're talking about in South Florida and in the Texas Valley, there was a bigger shift. And let me try to explain to two different places. We like to talk about it as Latino voters and not the Latino vote. Obviously, I'm a Mexican that grew up in East Texas who sounds like an old white man when I talk. We're different when we are being addressed in San Diego, LA, San Antonio. But the real key here is that these congressional districts along the valley have never been marginal seats until recently. They were safe Democratic places where 80% of every Latino there, 80% of them Mexican American, were in a Latino seat. And the race down there was about the primary and not the general. Along came Donald Trump, and it kind of exposed the lack of work that the Democratic Party had not done in these areas because they were very safe places that we took for granted we're going to always vote Democrat. And because it was Texas, a very red state, there was never a bunch of investment to go tell the next generation of Mexican American folks that they should be Democrats because they align with our issues. And poll after poll shows that we align with Latinos basically because the average age of a Latino is 27. Younger people are more progressive. They're a little more liberal. So we have a lot of opportunity with demographics, but it's not a destiny, while Republicans are still in kind of a demographic cul-de-sac with a bunch of old white people.
Finn, Chuck said lack of work on this particular constituency. If not taking it for granted, maybe giving them a sense that they possibly were being taken for granted.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's something you see in some of these most recent polls, that especially among the Democratic base voters here in these districts in these areas, they do feel that there's not enough. There was one significant poll that I saw in Nevada. The Nevada voters were half of them of this Latino vote were not approached by either party. I mean, and you're leaving points on the board. You know, like, why not go after these voters, especially now in Nevada, in Arizona, aside from just Texas? There are key Senate battleground races that where 20% of eligible voters are Latinos. Like, the party needs those voters. They depend on those voters when it comes to these tight races, and that's when it will come down to these votes come to November 8th.
Chuck, I want to ask you first, and we'll go to Leslie. In South Florida, there's a dynamic of the ideology of social democratic or democratic socialism, and that is to say some of those voters, either from Cuba, Venezuela, react very strongly and in many cases negatively to that. Walk the audience through that dynamic.
South Florida is a nuance of one kind of Latino. There's from all over the country, but there's this real concentration of Cubans in one county and neighborhood by neighborhood, Hialeah and a few others that have a whole different immigration story than a Mexican American like me, that are way more whiter, that are way more conservative, and they are just bedrock Republicans, always have been, and you're really not going to persuade them. You saw a whole bunch more of them participate in the 2020 election. That's why you saw the number for Donald Trump explode in Miami-Dade because of this Cuban vote. Then you sprinkle in Venezuelans who are immigrating here from a communist country. You sprinkle in Colombians who are immigrating here from, again, a dictatorship. Then you see this socialism word being a real poison pill in this particular place. Now, you don't see that everywhere in America where there are Latino voters. You see Republicans using the socialist angle, but it really don't affect elections outside of South Florida. But it affects South Florida elections really, really big.
And Leslie, you got about 35, 40 seconds. In Florida, that vote in Miami-Dade County was crucial to giving former President Trump a bigger than expected margin statewide.
It's certainly, Broward. And you can think of a little bit higher, northern part of Florida, in central Florida. You're talking about Broward County, that I-4 corridor. It's the gateway to Latin America. And it has those economic interests, certainly, but that the socialist aspect and fleeing many of these dictators, looking for that freedom, is a key part of the Republican platform. And they expect to hear any Republican candidate talk and echo those messages.
Ben Gomez, Leslie Sanchez, and Chuck Rocha, we thank you very much. Tomorrow's January 6th committee hearing is likely the last public hearing before the midterms. We will take you to Capitol Hill and let you know what to expect. You are streaming Red and Blue.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
Yoga and wellness has become a place of anti-science.
Online clickbait.
The algorithms feed you content based upon your own fantasy.
Potentially at my peril.
There's no question about it.
Spreading digital disinformation.
Their entire yoga studio and spiritual community got so embedded in all of the QAnon stuff that it became this sick place.
Why pro-health people are fertile ground for anti-science messages.
We can just go into the whole mask thing. A lot of us just believe that's symbolism for silencing people.
People are locked in this mindset. They've been taught to accept what the medical doctors say.
No longer are you going to be willing to take any medical advice.
It's a big problem that we urgently need to address.
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
We need to put an end to this territorial status.
Will statehood create a better Puerto Rico?
So that we have the same quality of life that you see in the States.
What do you worry about?
Me living here in the future.
They're giving incentives to non-Puerto Ricans to come to Puerto Rico
and extract our natural resources and take over our land.
Vacation in Puerto Rico, and in exchange for that, you don't pay taxes.
Why would I allow somebody who abused me for 123 years to then consume me?
An original CBS Reports documentary streaming now.
when weather turns extreme.
Massive and rapidly intensifying hurricane.
Every second counts.
Hurricane Fiona slams Puerto Rico with flooding and power outages.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bringing virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Well over 9 feet. This is not survivable.
You'll have time to get prepared.
You want to have the advantage on severe weather days.
It just may save your life.
Feel the forecast. Weather when it matters most on CBS Mornings.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
We are so excited we just can't hide it.
CBS Mornings are, well, everything your morning should be.
Let's do it!
Let's go!
CBS Mornings, starting at 7.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Major Garrett. The January 6th House Select Committee is holding another public hearing tomorrow. This will be the 9th hearing by the panel, and it's expected to be the last one before the midterm elections. CBS News congressional correspondent Scott McFarland joins us now from Capitol Hill. So, Scott, give us a preview.
Yeah, just a few moments ago, we learned from the committee aides who are putting this hearing together with the panel, there'll be no live witnesses this time. It'll look and sound a bit different, more of a closing argument. All 9 members of the panel, the 7 Democrats and the 2 Republicans, will make some component of this presentation, and they are promising never-before-seen information and never-before-seen images. Major, those are the words of a congressional committee that knows it also must try to regain America's attention.
And is it going to be about the Trump world and connecting the dots with those who were the most extreme, armed, and prepared to do real damage on January 6th?
You may hear about those far-right groups. You may hear about those fake electors schemes. You may hear about some of the ancillary players, but this is a hearing that's going to be focused on Donald Trump. His name will be invoked, I suspect, hundreds of times, not just dozens of times. If this is a closing argument, this committee has been unambiguous about their pursuit, that the former president had a centrality to the scheme to overturn the elections. He will be the focal point tomorrow.
How about new witnesses that the committee has talked to since its last public hearing? People that were very prominent in the Trump world? Might we see some videotape testimony from them?
But one of the most sought-after interviews for this committee was Ginny Thomas, wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, somebody the committee says who was forcefully arguing to fight the 2020 election results to people in the Trump inner circle. One committee member tells CBS News there was no video recording of that interview, so we won't see those taped excerpts, but I'd be surprised if we don't see quotes or some notes from that interview. They pursued it so zealously, and they scored that interview just days before tomorrow's hearing.
Right. One last thing before we let you go, Scott. There's been a lot more communication or a lot more receiving of communication from the Secret Service. Will that be a big part tomorrow?
Yeah, the committee aides we spoke with characterized it as hundreds of thousands of pages, Major, and yes, it will be a component of tomorrow's hearing, but the absolute trajectory is unknown, and we are less than 24 hours from the gavel slamming.
Scott McFarland, thank you so very much. The next January 6th hearing begins tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. You can watch it live here on CBS News Streaming, along with our coverage and analysis throughout the day. Well, that does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of this very fine program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/redandblue.
You ready?
A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed.